It may not seem like, g'day, friends and fans, it may not seem like it at all. But trust me, the rise of the affluent, white, female, urban liberal is over. We are beginning to see the decline and, in many cases, the fall. See, just like the rise of feminism, the fall of feminism will be equally fragmented. It comes not just from the recognition that feminism is greed, lust, envy, it's all the sins. The problem is, most of them never recognise that feminism was never going to deliver its promise of egalitarianism. And most feminists didn't want egalitarianism. They wanted influence, power, and wealth. Now, power is one of these weird things, right? You can influence people without having political power. The group has political power, but they wanted individual power, like CEOs and all the powerful positions in society. And wealth is subjective. If everybody's that wealthy, everybody's poor. So they didn't want egalitarianism. They wanted to be well heeled, and they wanted to be admired, envied, actually, by other women. And they wanted men to lust after them long after their natural attraction has worn off. Because, right, once you get over the lust phase, in a relationship, you have the honeymoon period, lust. You breed, you have a few children, then you have the content phase. Well, women didn't want the content phase. They got bored. But as the 50s and 60s gave women more free time, that gave them time to plan, to plot, to consider, to read women's magazines and follow the leader. G'day, friends and fans. We are witnessing the decline of feminism, and it is great. But of course, we must not be complacent. We must mock and ridicule them to the ends of their term. But we look at it. We look at first the rise of the awful, right? Women of the 50s admired, loved, and respected their husbands and children. They taught respect. And if children did not respect, they were given the Board of Education. A psychological contingent known as respect for others, because children are born without discipline, without direction. You install this through gentle persuasion. However, many women did, in fact, overextend the hand and, in fact, got their husbands to not just twitch a kid, but to give them the belt. Things got out of hand. But you don't throw the bath. You don't throw the baby out with the bath water. You refine. But no. Many did not. They were adamant, right, about the absolutism of free will, the William Penn effect, the whether it's the moaning moron or the absolutist, the anarchist, they tried to impose their will on society. The libertarian or the liberal, right? We saw the shift, right? I've got some notes. All right, so the white urban female, right? Awfuls, as they are known in political discourse, did become a political power and not just cultural but political influence, right? Specifically, destroyed uh, they destroyed the British Empire. They undermined the, particularly in India, right? Orphans chased Indian men, right? They frolicked in the fields naked, while denying, of course, this was nothing more than lust, right? They found ways to express themselves as sinful as possible. Gluttony, becoming fat on purpose, and despite the reduction in their health, their lifespan, their general wealth, right? But anyway, as women in the 50s reached their middle age and they reach at the peak of their affluence, older women in urban and suburban areas abandoned the centre right to vote for liberal causes, because liberals uh, offered them social issues. Climate change. Believe it or not, climate change wasn't a recent phenomenon, right? You had the rise of climate change. At the time, it was actually a fear of an ice age. You had, of course, women's issues, women's abortion. You had many cultural issues specific to women at the time, such as workplace health and safety, sexual abuse, uh, sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, uh, sex based violence. So, particularly fueled by the media focus on white serial killers, even though white serial killers were not the majority of killers. So the media created fear, and fear drove women to the left. They By the 2016, they were known as the resistance, right? And in some countries, the teal phenomenon. This is a demographic of women who flipped safe seats, right? These were single women, college educated, who moved into predominantly uh, traditional conservative areas, and they would deliberately move into conservative areas, and they would deliberately join conservative women organizations to eat them, to rot them from the inside, because they were the daughters of influential people, right? You had Mackenzie Bezos. Well, they were the wives and daughters of influential people, I should say. You had Mackenzie Bezos, Melinda Gates, many feminist writers. You had, of course, the staff writers from Clio and many women's magazines who had lots of free time on their hands because they didn't do any work, right? They'd come to the office, right? They would get their marching orders. They would pull out their pro forma articles from various think tanks, just smudge them around and submit them by the end of the day. They had no work for the rest of the week, right? Sometimes month, right? An article a month. Wow, what hard work! And thousands of dollars were pouring in their paychecks every month. So to keep their jobs, they became the affluent army, right? The teal phenomenon, where they would pose as predominantly centrists, move into positions and ask tough and difficult questions of women who were not prepared or even understood that they were being manipulated, right? They had all these what if scenarios, and these what if isms broke society down, especially the wine mun politics, right? Older women who were culturally and socially isolated for a long time, happy in their niche, right? But they were attacked for being white, they were attacked for being privileged, and educated women uh, kept saying, "We're just going to balance motherhood and political life and social life." In the end, right, when push comes to shove, right, you cannot satisfy in life, right? You cannot satisfy your needs, wants, and desires. Something has to go. And unfortunately, they abandoned motherhood. So thus became the inevitable fall. By the mid-80s, offals were already in decline. You had white guilt rising from the push. Well, already by the 70s, the trained Marxists were moving through the black community, pushing reparations, pushing racial justice, and the offals, in order to build their power base, started aligning themselves with gays, blacks, Jews, Latinos, and, of course, the Indian. But they also aligned themselves with Asian freedom fighters, like terrorists, the communists, right? Every communist cause. And the thing is, women became a minority in their own movement. You had a split, and other videos have covered this, the split and in the white liberal movement, in which you now had Latinos, blacks, and other minorities edging out white women. So, in areas where minorities were a majority, they wouldn't vote for the white woman. So the whites kept moving. White flight became a thing. Yet they would keep voting for more and more immigration. And their, despite the fact their power and influence was in obvious decline, they couldn't stop because their wealth and they were tied. That often their jobs were tied to NGOs, right? Take Mackenzie Bezos. She was now divorced, billions of dollars, and an influence peddler. She can't stop, right? Right? She's under social and political pressure. She stops, she pays taxes, right? And for some reason, they have such an aversion to paying tax. Why? Because they want to destroy the country anyway. They don't care anymore, right? But the problem is they created privilege for everybody but themselves. And they push themselves out of politics. Now, of course, this white guilt has given a rise to a new female empowerment group, the trad wife. No white guilt. Whites did not invent slavery. No white guilt because whites ended slavery. No guilt, no apologies, no reparations. Why must Africa be for Africans, but Europe can't be for Europeans? Why must children be trained to be guilty of a crime they did not commit? Because the selfish want to push us out of the countries we built to inherit the wealth that these countries represent. And of course, it's all funded by China through these NGOs, right? Influence peddling. But now that Trump has defunded parts of the UN, and the UN is now in a panic, right? It can't fund its refugee program anymore. It can't fund the mass movement of people across countries anymore to invade the West. And in fact, it's desperately trying to cling to these refugees, trying to convince them to not leave America, but stay in sanctuary cities. But even sanctuary cities are they're not safe for families. There's as women are abused in basically they flee. So you get more and more suburbs that are going to die because they're nothing but restless young men who attack each other because they have no jobs, they're unemployable, right? They can't speak English, they're increasingly violent, increasingly turning to crime, and they're looting society to sell drugs, buy prostitutes, trade prostitutes. So they're inevitably killing their own countries back home. Their countries are in decline, crime on the rise, that drains wealth and resources because you're destroying, not creating. But by and large, that was only a crack. As suburbia shifted to the resistance, right? The shift from centre left to far left. As women got older, they didn't get more conservative, they got more radical, particularly those without children. They went from liberal causes to communist causes, motivated by social issues and the opposition to Reagan, Bush, Trump, you name it. They even started to oppose some Democrats. Resistance power peaked in 2016 and with organising elections and fundraising for Democratic campaigns. Again, the teal phenomenon, that is, white women pretending to be Republican or Libertarian or just moderate Democrats, would slowly push areas through other women into climate change, right? Climate activism. They would target teenagers and millennials. But Gen Z has seen and heard throughout their high school, right, about climate change and the climate predictions. And they suddenly notice a disconnect. They hear about Al Gore and his predictions that have come and gone. Hurricanes, none of these things have happened. And now they're learning about climate change. Suddenly they're learning 1 year about climate change ending the world in a few years to suddenly the benchmark suddenly 10 years without any explanation or ability to even prove that there's been any, right? And they also hear that the most pollution comes from China, India, and Africa, right? Half the pollution in the world comes from China. The top 5 countries for pollution are not white. And now they claim that we have to have a technological transfer from the West, right, to China. But China has the technology. They export windmills, but they don't build them at home. They have seen, there are documentaries now showing vast numbers of farmland dying because of solar panels, right? They put solar panels over the crops, and the crops are dying in the shade. There's some sort of salination of the magnetic field is actually attracting salts and magnesium and other elements, creating and the fields are disrupting the plants. So the fall and the backlash begins post 2016, and their efforts began to wane. The demographic became a punching bag for the left and the right. Right, awful's been punched because feminists have split. Feminism split over trans issues, over the shift from white women to black men, and the Karens with the infighting, the right between BLM. You had the anti-communists who did not want to join this communist revolution. They were sick of the Karen and the wine mums who basically just whine, and then they go and they become seen as the cancer of the nation, right? Where nothing is ever good enough. They protest they protest everything, traveling around the country. Some of them are earning 6-figure salaries, but because it's all in kind with no actual IRS coming around to see how much they're earning, where their income was, where all these bus tickets, who's paying for everything, right? NGOs hire the bus, right? Since the 70s, NGOs have been hiring Greyhounds. This has kept Greyhound in business, right? 50 buses to bus people into Washington every year for protests. Nobody questions where the money comes from. More and more people are finding that these big influence peddlers are lieutenant governors, using state funds, reallocating them to fundraisers. Also, an organisation fundraise puts money into the party. The party puts money into other NGOs and then backs it with state funding, and they go out and hire buses to organise more protests. That's money laundering. Now, increasingly feminists have become a target of aggression. Protesters have become increasingly violent. But of course, there's the thing where you have violent teens who basically could, when you fall into a pattern of violence, they increasingly become more and more violent. You know, you have the knockout game. You have things where bored teens roam the streets attacking people, taking advantage of the law that continually revolving doors lets them out at 18, but they're dead by 27, right? That's a phenomenon, right? And a lot of women are frequently ruining men's lives with false accusations, causing family division, family harm. You have the teenage girls who accuse their fathers, and they skew the statistics on crime. So real crimes aren't getting investigated because these white affluent protesters are pushing women's issues, right? But you're creating a divided society where other issues are not dealt with. So you have an increasingly aggressive minority who wants reparations and political power and to displace the so-called colonizers. So they're becoming a victim of their own politics. So women, particularly white college educated women who have far less children, have far less marriages, are becoming more and more isolated because they hate each other, right? Because the climate change group hate BLM, BLM hate the climate change group, because it's now a competition for funding, all right? Trump, as he's pulled back all the funding, they're now having to compete with states for funding, and states relied on the funding from feds. And of course, then there's the UN groups that aren't getting funded anymore. So, and plus with increasing radicalization, radical groups are turning against each other because there's an ideological gap between the older women and younger women. The young men are becoming more conservative and walking away. So they are losing their power base. They didn't have kids. Single mothers, white single mothers don't have mostly children of color. And of course, they're increasingly turning against their parents as white colonizers and demand more and more, that they do more. And so, again, it's shifting feminism to racial demographics. So you have such a political disconnect and discontent, right? Because there's never ending anger. There is everyday rage, every day a new political target, every day a new complaint. So social fatigue is setting in, right? You have people already talking about black privilege fatigue, sick of Black History Month, sick of all feminist days, sick of women's rights, because they aren't rights, they're privileges, right? A right is an intangible, like the right to speak. But you don't have the right to be believed. Women say, oh, we have the right to sexual gratification. Okay, sexually gratify us as men. Suddenly women say, no, we want unwanted sexual attention. Good. Tear down all your fireman calendars. Stop publishing books about cowboys who pursue women and take them on extravagant dates and perform and only want to be friends and give them foot rubs and oral sex and don't want to have children and respect boundaries and all these other narcissistic fantasies where women are getting raped by demons, werewolves, vampires, right? Minotaurs, right? Literally books about rape. This is tearing, and because women control publishing, normal book deals. I mean, not just for men, but for women too. Normal book deals are falling by the wayside, right? They're pushing political content left, right, and center. And it's creating a divide, right? You even have now trad wives, right? They just don't want anything to do with politics, right? They're religious based. And so their freedom of religion is under attack, right? And of course, now you have the problem where Christian women's groups are coming under attack because more and more they're demanding that they kowtow to Islam. And suddenly the feminists are going, we're not wearing burqas. and then they're suddenly getting a backhand, and they suddenly realize that, wait a minute, because women think, right, they have to always do the opposite of men. So if we say Islam is bad, they go out and marry a Muslim, and that's short lived, right? All these women, they disappear from society all the time, right? And nobody's taking account, right? But the rise of the anti-Islamic movement, you see that now in not just in India, but it's spreading to Iran, right? And it's going to spread through the Middle East. It's inevitable. It's not being spread by white people. It's being spread by Indians, right? Indians, Pakistanis, all of them. Arabs, Persians, Kurds, Sunni, you name it. And it has Saudi Arabia in a panic. They're begging Trump not to end the Islamic regime in Iran, because if the Islamic regime ends in Iran, anti-Islam will spread further and undermine Saudi Arabia eventually. Now, you hear so often about the Rashmanis that and other groups that the Saudis displaced in their revolution. Was it 78 years ago or something? 75, fifth anniversary was recent. Did you know they were Jewish? Did you know Saudi Arabia used to have was home to a lot of Jews? You know, a lot of Americans are not Jews from Israel. They're Jews from North Africa, Syria, and other parts of the Middle East. Jews were never concentrated in Israel. They were spread out throughout, and have been, well, they've always been, right? Judea was tiny, tiny, right? The population of Judea is less than 1 million, was. And see, the Jewish groups, they're split as well. People don't want anything to do with the Jewish left or the Jewish right, right? There's a split. A reactionary counter-revolution is going on around the world, right? Radical females are now giving rise to reactionary movements, right? The anti-liberal, the anti-feminist, the anti-Islam, every revolution is now bringing an anti-ism, right? Whether it's fascism, communism, feminism, Islamism, and this is giving rise to a new nationalism. The anti-revolutionary is now a nationalist, right? Because the nationalism and globalism, right? If you're a feminist or an Islamist, you're all part of the globalist agenda, right? And that political it's like a political sieve, right? So everybody's been filtered out who doesn't conform to every agenda. So you could still be gay, you could be Jewish, you could be anything, right? But people are walking away from Islam and feminism because they're the two absolutists where if you even a monicum of absolutism, right? Absolute belief in the cause, you're targeted as a misogynist, a rapist, a devil worshipper, you name it, right? Islam and feminism may hate each other, but they are clinging to each other like a bitter old couple who cannot survive without each other, and nobody to take care of them because they were too stupid, too selfish, and too short-sighted to have children or to love others, right? If you can't love others, you hate children, right? And if you hate children, you eventually become someone who can't love others. So yeah, it's self-defeating, right? So where do trans fit in? Well, trans is a transitory fad. It's in its rise, but it's slowing down. And as Elon Musk said, his own research indicates that there are now a growing trend of people looking for lawsuits and lawyers. Right now, lawyers are resisting, but soon the temptation will be too big. Right? They want to sue Big Pharma. Big Pharma right now has billions of dollars, and lawyers are looking at that and salivating. but they know the moment they cross the line and start suing Big Pharma over trans, they're going to be excluded. So they want a case they can win and win big. So it's a growing lawsuit. But any lawyer stepping out of the fold so far has been ridiculed, persecuted, framed, accused of rape, accused of misogyny, sexual harassment. Right now, the left is tearing itself apart. Lawyers, of course, are the bastions of the left. They're the most. And where do you think women get their power? Right? They are. Most of these women are lawyers, psychologists. They usually have a gender studies degree, but that gender studies degree often has components in law, business, uh, sociology. Right? It's a ad hoc uh, coalition that's falling apart. Right? Political activists are often trained lawyers, trained Marxists, trained gender specific arguments. And the thing is, all the right has to do is not defend the right, but attack the left. Right? Do girls have penis? No. I don't care about your arguments. I don't care about your identities. I don't care about your feelings. Right? I identify as a attack helicopter. Boom! Your arguments. I identify as a attack helicopter. You call me a misogynist? How can I be? I identify as a feminist. Are you a lesbian? Well, fantastic. So am I. And suddenly, right, all the stuff that's been going on in Korea, right, particularly with the 4B movement, it is having a huge toll on these women's groups and women's movements. Is they don't know what to do, right? Someone's trans, yeah, sure, they're excluded from many groups. So all of a sudden, they're the trans, the furry, all these cult groups, right? Trans and furry, right? They're pretty much a fringe cult group now. They're losing their political power before they even peak because they're running into Islam, they're running into uh, pure feminists like J.K. Rowling, who's poured over $1 billion into her causes, right? She's also ideologically trapped, right? She has a huge tax bill if she stops donating money, right? So she has to, right? It's a money laundering scheme. She was only paid a lot of money to launder it in the feminist movements. You know, believe me, you do not want to betray the system. The system will always bankrupt you, right? The system bankrupted me. I created a uh, vertical. Designed a vertical wind generator. I refused to become a radical environmentalist, and the state bankrupted me. Right, demanded the exorbitant sum. Right, the state always has a way to ruin people's lives. They lure you in with promises of support. They finance you, and then they suddenly go, "Oh, these were loans. You have to pay us, pay us back, or we don't believe you set out to make." I have got accused of not setting out to make a profit and got bankrupted. No lawyer would touch my case, right? Yet there are plenty of examples where people have won cases and got $1 million payouts for, for being falsely bankrupted, right? My father took my father was falsely bankrupted, and through his group, you'd be surprised how many people every year are falsely bankrupted by their governments. To basically, it's a tax, right? And the government seeking revenue they reward, right? There's a reward for rooting out tax evaders, and so they will creatively use the rules that are so ambiguous, right? There's always more than one meaning to these laws, right? Interpretations they call them, but yeah, people are fighting back, whether it be patriotic uh, or not, whether it be white, black, blue, or brown, yeah, there's a clear biological you that says if you have this organ, you're a female. If you don't, you Michael, there's only two organs, one or the other. If you have a even if you have okay, there's a few genetic disorders out there, but if you have a genetic disorder, right, you could have all this, but instead of ovaries, you have testicles. This happens, right? There are men born with testicles inside their body. This is so rare, and it's surgically fixed, right? Usually they don't. They may have a tube, but they don't. But they don't have they don't have the biological material to be a real woman, right? And they do eventually grow a penis. It is a weird phenomenon, but there are all right. But the problem is these liberals use intersex, right? The phenomenon of intersex, which is so rare, you'll likely never meet one. But the thing is, they use this where what if as to believe that trans women are men, right? When no, you're in between, right? You're intersex, right? Right. We don't have a cure. We don't have a explanation, right? But you got a prostate, you're a man, maybe. You're not a chick, and you'll never will be. And more feminists even are turning against their own ideology because their own ideology is increasingly excluding them. All right, you may have trans exclusionary feminists, but you have heterosexual exclusionary feminists, and they are increasingly fanatical. They're a decreasing minority. They're a minority, and they're decreasing because they don't reproduce. And even if they do, there's no guarantee their offspring are going to be gay or even like them, considering, right? When a child is a rebel to their conservative parents, they call themselves a hero. But when their children is a rebellious against liberal politics, you're a disobedient child. See, they don't understand that you know, that by being disobedient, they're creating a pattern of disobedience that causes perpetual revolution, and therefore they constantly create chaos that never leads to anywhere. Conservative societies, conservative homogeneous societies become successful. Liberal societies become interracially mixed, interracially conflicted, sexual identity divided, and they inevitably collapse. So when Rome went from being a conservative republic to a degenerate imperialist society of trying to interbreed and intermix everybody into one homogeneous sludge, it fell apart because they could never be homogeneous, right? The blacks wanted to be black. They didn't want to be brown. They didn't want to be... And you see this in Africa, right? Most Africans are not pure blood, by the way. You'd be surprised how many Africans have European DNA. Or you wouldn't, really. But yeah. And, of course, it's increasing that over time they're getting lighter and lighter, which is causing what they call skin panic, where you have discrimination against light-skinned Africans. So don't think for a second these groups are victims or their um, all their ills stem from the fact that white people exist. Okay, whites did not invent slavery. Whites did not invent discrimination. Right? Whites didn't even create imperialism. Right? Right? It was the Semites who invaded Babylon, creating. But the city-states of were already in conflict, giving rise to Babylon. Babylon was attacked by the Semites, so you had the first civil war, the first civil war, the first interracial war, the first imperialist regime, the first monarchies, the first slavery, all of that stemmed out of the Middle East. But Africa didn't create civilization. They just went from tribalism to slavery, right? And created kingdoms as the Arabs spread through North Africa. So, and again, before Rome, right? Mongol hordes, Chinese civilization was already on the rise, and China, the Chinese civilization and the Greek civilization, though rising in similar time periods, China was hyper aggressive, and you have warring states, the roaming Mongols for centuries. So the history of the world is poorly taught. Most don't want to pay attention to it. So that's why intersectional and racial politics, you hear all these lies, and people don't counter them because they're not historically educated. They're educated in Marxist interpretations. So we have now a disconnect between the truth in society, which is again another source of conflict, which will continue to erode feminism, because people now know feminism made stuff up. That feminist historians were lying about the past, about how bad rape was, when in fact by the 17th century women were on a pedestal. They weren't. This is where women not working came from. Women were on a pedestal. Women created and took themselves out of the job market to be fawned over, to be pampered. But as society changed and evolved, and costs rose, and there were more women than men, women were competing to be pampered, and it just, suddenly you had so many single women and single mothers because they swang from vine to vine. It was women create their own problems. Without discipline in society, the selfish will always sin, and the only way to defend you against yourself, and you have to defend yourself against sin. Right? So thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and please support the channel. Right? And if you want to defend yourself against sin, you have to defend yourself against feminism now, don't you? So again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. You can support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree, description below. Scan the QR code on the screen. Please and thank you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.